activity, you surely will have a serious adverse event or die. I think it's irresponsible to try to minimize the effects that 7-OH can have by saying that anyone can sit down in a single setting and consume 2 pounds of 7-OH. I think they misled the legislature in doing that. And that's a problem we have to come to some agreement on, that responsible marketing really has to be implemented and followed. The Louisiana example. I can tell you that both in Louisiana and in the state of Texas, I had hours and hours of conversations with the sponsors of those bills. We were there. We were testifying and we were working behind the scenes because we wanted to understand what was happening. It had nothing to do with 7-OH or Kratom. The arguments were made, particularly by Senator Kerry in Texas, was no one can tell the difference, so we've got to ban it all. It had nothing to do with whether there was an adverse event associated with either one, other than in the state of Louisiana, the sponsor said that they were aware of it and they lost their child to Kratom. You can look at the FDA website, you can look at the HHS website, you can look at the NIDA website. All consistently say that it is rare for there to be a Kratom death, and when it occurs, it's typically attributable to poly drug use or adulterated Kratom product. So the question, and I'm going to answer it later, is whether or not you can identify Kratom or 7-OH being a death. And you don't have to listen to me, you can listen to the experts, and I'll get to that in 1 minute.
Thank you. So first of all, I agree with my parenting advice. On that. Just because other kids are doing it doesn't mean it's right. I totally agree with you on that. Don't agree with you on the rest of it. As far as the serving size limits, we're out here, we're ready to have a conversation about serving size limits. Okay? We're not against that. I would, if you give me that bag, and you give me 6 months, I'll probably take it off. I'm not going to take it here in one sitting because I listened to your experts on this. So we're ready to have that conversation. You asked about, you noted how rare deaths are. I hate to bring it up, we're not in the business of trashing the myth. We think everyone should be able to make informed choices. But there have been 201 deaths in the last 2 years that are associated with mitragynine. And that's something that I think, should be talked about in this context. It's not something we go out and shout from the rooftops, but it's something that I hear as a board of directors.
Okay, Jeff, I have a question for you. The FDA's federal adverse event reporting system is the most comprehensive repository of data in the country when it comes to negative side effects of food, drugs, and dietary supplements. The FDA has raised concerns about the sale of 7-OH products. How do you address critics who argue it's too risky for public use, and that the lack of clinical studies justifies a complete ban on 7-OH products?
Thank you, Dr. Ross, and thanks so much for being willing to moderate. Dr. Ross is an addiction neuroscientist and a pharmacologist with maybe addiction. Neuropharmacologist, is that right? Yeah. Okay, so that's long for extremely smart. So, despite the other side's rhetoric, the FDA letters, what they typically say, verbatim, is that there is inadequate information to make a final determination about the safety of 7-OH. So, again, don't let the fear-mongering get you thinking that the FDA has already said, we're going to ban these products. 7-OH is not banned. It's not scheduled. It's not under emergency rulemaking. And, people who have gotten these letters are dealing with them in the appropriate venues with attorneys and will be responding to the FDA. So there's no need for you to freak out if you're somebody who didn't get a letter. The people who have gotten the letters, they've acted appropriately, and we'll see where things go, in the coming months and years. Simply put, though, if you look at the data and the facts instead of the hyperbolic headlines the other side created, again, the FDA's own data is what we're quoting here. And if you come up to me afterwards and give me your card, I'll email you the link to where you can go and look at this by yourself and see the deaths that result from MIT versus the lack of deaths that result from 7-OH.
You can't tell them apart.
What I anticipate you will hear in response, because it's what we heard at the press conference this morning, is that there are ghost effects. And the deaths that are being attributed to mitragynine are actually 7-OH. And that because of the instability of 7-OH, people who are toxicologists or coroners are looking at these autopsies and they're reading them wrong and they don't see the 7-OH. If that were the case, then what would you see just in the last 2 years that 7-OH has been on the market? If it were really as dangerous as they say, you would see the deaths from mitragynine spiking. That's not what you saw. And in fact, you saw the exact opposite. You saw the deaths from 2023 to 2024, the first full year that 7-OH was on the market, plummet by nearly 45%, from 110 to just 62. We think that's because customers have opted for a safer alternative. I want to end by saying, if everyone here could just take their 7-OH or Kratom hat off for a minute and just think about some of the things going on, we wouldn't be fighting. We would be screaming from the rooftops that overall, in the context of billions of servings, in the context of billions of servings, neither one of these products really presents a truly dangerous narrative, and we should focus on getting on the same page so we don't keep spending all of our money, to 50 state capitals killing each other.
This is a good job. I never let my kids get a secret statement that they want to argue, but with all due respect to Dr. Ross, anyone who believes what she just said, that FAERS is the most comprehensive, reliable, and credible database of adverse events in the world is incorrect. Everyone in this room can go to their keyboard, pick up a phone, and they can make a FAERS database request or a report, and it will pop. It is not verified by anyone until the FDA gets a cluster of events, and then they investigate it to determine whether or not there needs to be action taken. They require the manufacturer to conduct their own internal investigation. There have been no clusters that have mandated the FDA to react, to suggest that the FAERS database and all that data they present showing, the number of deaths. And I'll tell you, he can anticipate what he wants. The scientists, not me, the scientists say that 7-OH is unstable in the blood, it washes out. It is a known scientific fact. That's why you don't see deaths that are attributable to 7-OH, but maybe they're there. And why we see mitragynine, it's very stable, and it is being misrepresented, misreported by those medical examiners and by coroners, and that's what the FDA, NIDA, and the Secretary of Health and Human Services says about those deaths.
Now, 7-OH advocates claim that there is no safety signal where 7-OH is the cause of any death, and therefore concerns about safety are completely unjustified. Do you believe this is true?
Well, as I just said, you can't rely on the FAERS database as the reliable, credible database to determine whether it's true. Neither can we draw data about the deaths. But I think you have to turn to the scientists. At the conference that was held at the University of New York, I think it was the 4th International, maybe the 5th International Conference on Kratom, a representative of NMS Labs spoke. NMS Labs is the largest toxicology screening company in the United States, handling all of the autopsy reports, or most of them, from medical examiners and coroners and law enforcement agencies. And this expert stood up and said the problem with 7-OH is that it's unstable. The problem with 7-OH is it washes out. The problem is with 7-OH is that you don't detect it in a post-mortem toxicology screen, and all you see is a low level of mitragynine, which is what all 7-OH products have, a very low level, and that's what is blamed for a Kratom-only death. It misreports it, it is incorrect, and it simply cannot be tolerated or relied upon as a basis for anyone to say that is a Kratom death. We need to analyze this thing carefully, all of us do, whether we're in the Kratom business or the 7-OH business. And after we agree that we're going to rid the marketplace of 7-OH products calling themselves Kratom, then we can have a better discussion, because then reports that are received by the FDA, by NIDA, and by the DEA are going to be evaluated more accurately and correctly as we go along. But I repeat again, if the standard for safety signal is deaths, we are trapped. We're trapping ourselves. Because the truth is that a safety signal also goes to the quality of life of the individual that's consuming your product. Are you dependent? As Kratom studies have shown that people can become dependent on Kratom. That's not a great thing. You can become dependent on caffeine and coffee. The question is, how do you get off of that addiction or dependency? You can do it easily with Kratom because it is known as a partial agonist. It doesn't activate the pathway in the brain that goes to that euphoric high that draws you back to that addiction. That's the bottom line. Anyone who suggests, oh, we don't have a safety signal yet, has not looked at the experience that people reporting about addictions to 7-OH because they are full binding agonists to the mu opioid receptors. That's the reality. And we may find that they are very good, because they're that powerful, they're very good analgesic activity that make them an excellent candidate to be evaluated by the FDA as a new drug. Because it may knock out all the opioids. Maybe it's the nirvana that we get to. But to sell it as an over-the-counter product and not have the safety data that's associated with it, that's a mistake. And that would be the death of this industry. We can make a quick buck today, cash in at the bank, at the expense of these consumers. And we're killing the industry in the process.
Where's the reasonable basis of safety for Kratom, mixtures? There isn't. So the same can be said of other products that are on the market sold by your members. Look, you asked about the signal. If 7-OH were truly as dangerous as the fearmongers allege, we're not waiting to just see deaths. Where are the breathless nightly news segments about ERs that are deluged with people who have taken 7-OH? Don't exist. Where's the huge spike all around the country in poison control calls? Don't exist. Where have there been public health leaders saying that other people are dying in ERs because they can't get a bed because of all the people with 7-OH poisoning? They don't exist. Okay? None of them do. If they did, it would be front page news, not the subject of paid AstroTurf protests like you saw yesterday here. ER docs in St. Louis, in New York City, and in San Francisco. None of them have ever heard of 7-OH. They've all heard of Trank, okay? They've all heard of tranxylazine being mixed with fentanyl. They've never heard of 7-OH.
Okay, Jeff.
Because it's
there
being called
have been
Kratom.
some recent studies related to the safety of 7-O. What do they say about the safety margin of 7-O in comparison to mitragynine?
That's a good question. First of all, and important to understand in simple terms, researchers have found that given the bioavailability of roughly 2%, the amount of 7-OH at the mu receptor is a tiny proportion of the administered dose. And as our scientists, people like Dr. Ross, can explain infinitely better than me, that's why 7-OH appears to be much safer than opioids like heroin or other drugs of abuse. Also critical to understand is that fully synthetic products are wholly created in a lab, and that's not what this is. It is natural, it exists in nature, and a manufacturing process simply replicates what the body is already doing. Now on to a couple of the studies that you referenced a minute ago, Dr. Ross. One compared the in vitro toxicity of 7-OH to that of NIT, and reported that 7-OH, quote unquote, is unlikely to contribute additional toxicity beyond that associated with mitragynine. It exhibits reduced activity at protein targets implicated in cardiotoxicity, hepatotoxicity, and nephrotoxicity, and does not exhibit greater cytotoxicity in human cells. 7-OH is demonstrably safe in preclinical testing. In other words, found not to create toxicity in cells or genes that are in the heart, kidney, or liver. And in fact, it found that 7-OH showed slightly less toxicity than mitragynine. Next, I want to address a recent canine study. The main takeaway, again, was that it found no serious cardiac or neurological damage, even at doses high above typical human use. So in the interest of transparency, I do want to address what Matt talked about up front. There are adverse events, and adverse events in these studies are grouped into either minor, moderate, or severe. And in this study, there was a minor adverse event, again, So again, we don't know. There's a ton more to learn, but the scientists who conducted that study came away confident that no cardiac and neurological damage was observed at high doses. And remember, non-human animal models do not necessarily translate perfectly into humans. We've seen the data, and as far as 7-OH is alleged abuse potential in humans, there's not a single published case report on 7-OH substance use disorder. However, there are cases and assessments showing such for Kratom, including one by Benjamin Swart in the 2024 American Society of Addiction Medicine. So, to set aside all that research for a minute, we don't want to be here in the business. We don't want to be in the business of casting aspersions.
I wish I could speak.
We want to work together to fund more research, to learn more, so everyone can take these plant-based alternatives safely.
It's hard to imagine that they don't want to cast aspersions when they call the AKA a cartel and accuse us of precipitating all of the FDA actions as I like to snap my fingers when the FDA reacts. Who's right about it? Craziness. But I can tell you, bioavailability is one marker that should be evaluated and obviously will be in the context of scientists evaluating the effects of 7-OH. But the statement that 7-OH is safe in nature is disingenuous in this respect. Nowhere can you find 7-OH occurring naturally in Kratom or any Kratom-derived product that's out there on the shelf floor at 100 milligrams, 180 milligrams. That's crazy. These are synthesized, chemically manipulated products. And you can't hide behind the fact that it occurs in a drying process at very low levels when you isolate it and you enhance it. That's disingenuous, and you can't rely upon that as a way to justify being on the marketplace.
Matt, HART says these are natural plant-based products, but in walking the floor of the Champ Show, booth after booth promotes pseudo or synthetic 7-OH. The AKA entered into an agreement with HART on 7-OH marketing. Why did the AKA terminate that agreement?
Thank you. The criteria that I outlined in my opening statement was that in order for a product to enter the marketplace, there has to be a reasonable basis of safety based on the conditions of use for label. That's the federal law. Now, the 7-OH products have not met that criteria by the admission of their own scientists, and the ongoing studies that they refer to that are going on right now do not meet that criteria. You have to wait until you have it so that you have, upon demand of the FDA, that reasonable basis of safety to enter the marketplace under the labeling instructions. There is no criteria that's been identified nor validated by anyone that I've been aware of, nor is it shown in any scientific literature about what a safe dose of 7-OH is. If you want to manufacture and then actually sell a 7-OH product and exhibit it here, then for goodness sake, show us what the scientific basis is for that labeling instruction so that people know. Is it 2 pounds? I don't think so. Is it 100 milligrams? Don't think so. The reason we put the 2% level in 2019 and we tried to maintain that throughout the advocacy for the Kratom Consumer Protections Act is that we know that in its naturally occurring level, meaning after harvest, the way that the oxidization process occurs in natural leaves, it never gets greater than 2% of the overall alkaloid fraction of the plant, and that should transfer to the product. We think that's a critical criteria. But now, and by the way, that converts to about 1 milligram of 7-OH in each serving size. We think that's a good standard. And we're going to advocate for that going forward in our KCPAs. That reflects what happens naturally. It is wrong to suggest that 7-OH occurs naturally in nature. It does not at the levels in which they are isolated, purified, and increase the potency of it as they're going forward. With respect to carbohydrate, that same criteria applies to carbohydrate products. Prior to market entry, those products have to have the reasonable basis of safety. When the FDA comes and asks, that manufacturer, as they do in warning letters, will will have to demonstrate that they've had that reasonable basis of safety under the conditions of use. We support that. The American Kratom Association has a truth in labeling program, and we reported, not just 7-H products, more than 100 Kratom manufacturers were using illegal therapeutic claims in their marketing or that are improperly labeling their products, claiming it's something that it's not. And we've asked the FDA for action. That FDA that snaps to when the AK asked them to, they've not taken action on many of those 100 complaints that we filed, and we persist in it, and we recently forwarded them to the Federal Trade Commission. We are committed to protecting consumers. That's our mission, and we will continue to maintain it.
Then why not take some of your extract products off the market that are as high as 118 milligrams of mitragynine per serving? I don't think there's any reasonable basis of safety for those. And I think a broad array of scientists would agree with that. And that doesn't even include total alkaloids. There could be well over 200 milligrams of total alkaloids per serving. So, before I think, others get up on their high horse and lecture 7-OH and some 7-OH products, I think people need to take a close look at some of the things that they're putting out. Again, I would much rather be sitting at a table together and coming up with reasonable safety standards, whether it's dosage limits or anything else, than spending our time casting aspersions on products in the other sector. I think that would be a much more productive use of our time. And frankly, I think the businesses in this room would probably rather spend money on more research that provides a long-term scientific basis for all these products than they would be spending money on hearing us argue about it.
Okay, so Jeff, while 7-O has become an important tool for many people in opioid recovery, especially in underserved communities, you have acknowledged that 7-O is not a miracle compound and should be regulated responsibly. What type of regulatory framework do you envision that protects consumers without banning a product that has demonstrated safety and demand? And what is HART doing to promote accountability, consumer protection, and product transparency?
Thank you, Dr. Ross. And I hope you guys aren't going to hear this as just like a 2.5-minute ad for HART. But I want you to understand what HART is doing to try to, again, lead with responsibility. Again, we want regulation. Regulation will keep our products out in the market and will keep them safe. And our mission depends on that. But we don't wait for government. We try to self-regulate. Okay? HART members are really focused on voluntary regulation, which means several things. Let me go through them. The first is transparency and quality control. Accurately labeling all products to include 7-OH content, recommended serving sizes, daily intake limits, appropriate warnings, and usage instructions. All 7-OH members adhere to current good manufacturing practices to ensure products are free from contaminants and are tested to verify their consistency with these test results made public. And though 7-OH is a Kratom metabolite, we agree with you, Matt, that 7-OH products should not be confused with legacy Kratom products and should be clearly identified, distinguished, labeled accordingly. And I think that's a place where we can start potentially working together next legislative session in various states. It also means prioritizing consumer safety, implementing company-wide adverse event data reporting systems to improve safety monitoring. It means updating industry standards constantly based on emerging scientific data and consumer feedback, and building systems to actively monitor for early signs of misuse or abuse of our products to inform risk mitigation strategies. And it means not marketing products towards a specific medicinal effect. It means preventing underage access. HART member companies push to ensure the products that are sold only with age verification and ID checking measures, and use child-resistant packaging, sealed blister packs, and child-proof jars for all 7-OH products to reduce the risk of accidental ingestion, and pledge to avoid marketing and advertising in any form to individuals under 21, which is why the ice cream cone product was taken off the market. We want all of that stuff incorporated into regulatory frameworks, and I think you do too. We'd like to see high-quality 7-OH products strict testing, labeling, strong safety track records, lifting up this entire botanical wellness space. And finally, it means a commitment to sound scientific research. I've talked about that several times, but HART companies are funding various lines of research and support transparent dissemination of all findings to regulatory authorities. Yes, our study that we put out with the Beagle, it wasn't perfect. And I think that's indicative of how we want to operate transparently. And there's so much more to learn about all these botanicals. If you're a scientist out there who isn't familiar with us, please come up afterwards. We'd love to know what you're working on and how we might be able to help.
So when Jeff says, why don't you take 100 milligram extracts off the market, I'm reminded of Ronald Reagan famously saying to Jimmy Carter at Toledo, Ohio, in the 1980 presidential election, "There you go again." The truth is that the American Kratom Association is opposed to any product, kratom product, that is on the market that doesn't have the adequate basis for safety and doesn't have the conditions of use covered. And we want 100 milligram highly concentrated and highly potent extracts off of the market, and we have reported them to the FDA. We don't have that in process. We're doing it today, and we don't defend it. I have people across the country call me and say, "You're trying to put me out of business." And these are people that are small batch, by their description, small batch manufacturers. They're manufacturing kratom products directly from the material they receive from a farmer. And I tell them, yes, I am. Unless you're willing to follow the GMP practices mandated by the FDA and you're willing to label your products appropriately, I want you off the market. And that stands today as I stand here with you.
Now, 7-OH advocates claim 7-OH is a partial agonist, same as citrulline. And previous work by Dr. Jack Penningfield has shown both MIT and 7-OH do not trigger addictions like opioids. What's your opinion on that issue?
Well, first I'll say that I think it's a mistake for 7-OH people to try to borrow from Jack Penningfield's work in 2016 in his 8-factor analysis that was contributing to the decision by the DA to withdraw their original scheduling request. Because the 7-OH that was evaluated in that 8-factor analysis was that oxidized material that is contained in naturally occurring kratom leaf drying, and it was not an isolated super potency level. Same is true in 2018 when the evaluation was made by Dr. Jalal when he rejected the FDA's scheduling request for kratom, and he said it was based on embarrassingly poor evidence and data, but his evaluation was based again on products that were manufactured at the time he evaluated. Fast forward to 2023, which HART tells you is the first date upon which a synthesized or semi-synthesized 7-OH product entered the marketplace. They cannot borrow from Dr. Penningfield's analysis, and they're doing it online. They're publishing, saying, Jack Penningfield cleared us on this. He did not. His analysis of the kratom material that was being proposed for scheduling was based entirely on what was available in 2016 and 2018, and there was no artificially or oxidized 7-OH material that was highly potent that had been produced. I think that's critically important that we try to do what we should be doing in protecting consumers in the marketplace. The idea that we can suggest, as you can see down on the floor of this show, and by the way, that should not be the criteria, go into shops across America, and you look and see what's being sold there, and the ice cream cones went off. The tragedy was they were on. That was the tragedy. Why? Irresponsible marketing by someone chasing a dollar. That's all that was. Was it based on good science? Absolutely not. The person who was responsible for the introduction of that product on the marketplace should be held accountable by everyone. Everyone in this room, everyone in America, and I hope eventually they will be held responsible by regulators. And they can't absolve themselves by saying, oh, we took it off. You took it off. Why? Because you're under intense criticism leveled by the APA and consumers about how this is peddling kratom to kids. And I go to legislatures across this country, and I hear it consistently. Two things happen. One, when I say kratom, they start Googling it because they don't know what kratom is anymore. They do 7-OH, most of them. Then they say, what about the kids? That's what they ask. And why would we paint a target on our backs? why do we manufacture a product? And by the way, ice cream comes after anything. There are 7-OH products on the market today called Smurfs. Smurfs! Now defend that. You can't. It is irresponsible marketing, and we need to shut it down.
Whenever I was a date with someone and they reference Smurfs, I consider that a microaggression. But anyway. As far as reasonable basis of safety, I got to keep coming back to this because you talked about the products on our side, and people should be ashamed of themselves, and they have to answer this, and they have to be held accountable. But the product that I referenced earlier that has over 200 milligrams total alkaloid per serving is still on the market without a reasonable basis of safety. And so I just think we have to acknowledge that. In terms of serving size, what somebody might have said a year or two ago about 7-OH, and I don't know the conversation you were referring to, but would you sit and take 2 bags of 2 pounds of Kratom? Probably not. I think we have a lot of territory that we can work together on, whether it's serving size and dosage limits, whether it's the age restrictions and labeling and all that stuff. We don't want that any more than you do. And I think that kind of common ground could benefit all of us.
Okay, Jeff. Data shows that overdose deaths in the U.S. have declined since 7-O products became widely available. Does this correlation suggest that people are opting for safer alternatives? And what should policymakers be from that?
That's a great question, Dr. Ross. I want to be careful here because not a real scientist, but a social scientist, I want to stress that correlation does not necessarily equal causation. That said, I just want to throw out some facts and some numbers, okay? Per CDC data, fatal opioid overdoses peaked in August 2023, which was the month before 7-OH became widely available. After 2.5 decades straight of going up, with a few different ways, but going up steadily since 1998. The second decade of that saw rising availability of traditional Kratom. But the first year that fatal opioid overdoses actually declined out of 25 years was 2024. Again, the first full year that 7-OH was widely available throughout the United States. Over 500 million servings have been consumed since late 2023. And a large number of consumers who voluntarily provide testimonials report that they use it to ease opioid withdrawal. Let me take that data, because I think that big picture data is compelling. I want to try to make it a little more granular for you, which I know made it more compelling for me. The state in the country that most vigorously enforces its ban against 7-OH is Utah. Utah was the only state in America that had the largest increase in fatal opioid overdoses in 2024 of any state in the country. Also the state that vigorously enforces its ban. Conversely, 3 of the states that saw the biggest decline, with plummeting rates of fatal opioid overdoses by 35 to 40%, West Virginia, and Florida are 3 of the states with the highest per capita consumption of 7-OH. So I think when you dig down into the data, get a little bit more granular, it makes the story, more interesting. Again, want to emphasize the correlation doesn't equal causation. I'm throwing out data points, and it's going to take social scientists years, if not decades, to really disentangle all the factors behind this, because there are probably a lot of factors, as there are in any major trend like this. But we think the aforementioned data should at the very least caution all policymakers against just quickly banning a substance before it can be fully studied that might just have tremendous potential in so many ways.
There is a lag time between the passage of any legislation when it is implemented in the law, and they need to go back, HART needs to go back and look at the implementation dates of those states. And then there is a lag time between the rulemaking that's done by the state agency and their enforcement of it. And then, as we have seen in the Kratom space, there's a lag time if it ever comes about with strict enforcement. Utah just started enforcing in 2025 on 7-OH. So this is something that is an evolutionary pattern as you go forward. But to suggest that there is a correlation between the reduction in opioid overdose deaths and the introduction of 7-OH products is particularly offensive. In fact, out of COVID, people started socializing. The big deaths were from COVID when they were sitting home alone and overdosing. Coming out of COVID, what do we find? People socializing. And then Narcan, which was made by the government, available to everyone over the counter. That's why there's a Pulitzer Prize that's given to a newspaper for reporting on that, what the government did. I'll finish with this if I can. In the military, when someone tries to claim credit for some big heroic act, and they didn't do it, it's called stolen valor. And I think we need to be cautious of these claims, Jeff, that you have any correlation at all to tie to the reduction of opioid overdose. It's true.
Clear labeling, third-party lab testing, botanical wellness, serving size limits, and yet many of the products displayed, as well as the booth product specialists, can't tell you a safe amount or explain why in some cases, horse pills that I saw on the Florida gym show are not scored for serving. The 7-OH advocates claim that products are the reason for the dramatic drop in opioid overdose deaths in the past several years. And yet, in many cases, they are lumping deaths as being Kratom caused, as opposed to looking at the poly drugs that are often found in their systems. So what is your opinion on that?
Well, this is one of the difficult policy questions that has to be confronted by state legislators, legislators across the country. When they get data, and data, for example, as Jeff mentioned from the CDC, I'll give you an example of what the CDC says about Kratom deaths. In 2019, they reported on reports given by medical performers across the country about Kratom-related deaths, and they had 152 of those deaths, or 151 reported. 92 of which were Kratom only. Kratom only. That's the highly touted CDC, right? They said that, so that would be sufficient evidence to go and schedule Kratom. If that were true, if they could take 29 states and get that kind of data in that short period of time and get that kind of result, that would be a justification for scheduling Kratom. So why didn't it happen? Well, because the CDC looked at the reports of detected nitrogyny in the autopsy reports, and they found that in all but 7, there were polydrug use. Now, in many cases, the medical examiners and coroners just did what they typically do. They got lazy, and they just did what the FDA tells them they should do. And Kratom deaths were the death du jour that was available at that time. But the truth wasn't found in what the FDA reported to them or advised them to do, nor was it found in the reports by medical examiners and coroners across the country. The CDC themselves found that wasn't true. And then the 7 Kratom only. When they analyzed all of those 92 deaths, the CDC could find only 7, and then someone did something to the CDC they didn't particularly like, which is they examined those 7 deaths. 4 of those deaths had blood samples available for better testing. They used more sophisticated testing methodology for the 7. They found that all 4, and this was reported in the New England Journal of Medicine, a group of Colorado scientists tested the CDC's data. And they found 4 of the 7 for which there was blood samples available were polydrug use because they used more sophisticated testing methods. Now, you can answer the question for yourselves for the remaining 3 Kratom only. And the CDC's recommendation was that there should be a standardized post-mortem testing methodology because we're getting inaccurate results because they're consistently inaccurate. The deadly dose series by the Tampa Bay Times. It is reported by every state legislature that we go to and they reference it. We replicated their methodology for all of their deaths, and we found that every single one of them for which there is a tox screen available proved they were wrong. They were not graded on the best. And we got the same reports when we gave them the opportunity to match our data against theirs, because we actually had 5 or 6 more than they had. They refused. They said, it's not our job to validate your data. No, it's their job to validate the data they published on. And that report, Deadly Dose, is deadly to them, where they're wanting what they published the story for, which is a Pulitzer Prize. That's not going to happen, because it's invalid data, and the data that you're referencing doesn't match up to what the truth is.
So, again, I want to reiterate what I said in the opening, which is, you're not out there campaigning for a Kratom, okay? When the other side comes out swinging over and over and over in every single state capital, we have no choice but to point out the fact that there are 100 times as many adverse events in the FDA database related to Kratom versus 7-OH. But none of us gets out of bed every morning wanting to talk about that. We don't have any interest in talking about that. Okay? We believe that, again, billions of servings of both of our products are taken every year. And for the most part, consumers are singing their praises, and consumers know better than we do how their body works. We want to respect that, and we don't think the FDA has the numbers on either your products or ours to proclaim that they're unsafe. So I agree with a lot of what you said.
Okay, Jeff, speaking of consumers, what role do you think 7-OH fills in pain management, recovering from substance abuse, or mood disorder?
Thank you for the question, girls. Again, I'm not a scientist, and I want to be careful here in not making a medical claim, given the FDA situation. But through consumer testimonials, you've learned I've read through some of our company's consumer testimonials. I've read the Marvel report. I've read hundreds of these testimonials, and I've talked to tons of users. And what we've learned is that thousands and thousands of adults are consuming 7-OH products for a wide variety of reasons. The ones mentioned in the question, and others as well. And we are going to keep listening to them in coming years to better understand how 7-OH helps different people in their daily lives. Yes, we have some consumers who discuss recovery with us a lot. And I know that goes for Kratom as well. We have a 7-OH consumer that wrote an op-ed recently about how happy she is that she could finally lift her toddlers without pain because she didn't feel like she was an adequate parent because she couldn't pick up and walk with her kids. And I'm, can have my own story. For all the Gen Xers out there, remember that the old infomercial? I'm not a hand-in commercial guy. It's like, I'm not just the president of the Hair Club for Men. I'm also a member. Well, I'm not just a national policy director of HART. I'm also a happy consumer who can finally sleep more than an hour at a time, thanks to, since I started using 7-OH. So there is a reason that 500 million servings have been consumed. And it's all the things that we're referencing and all the things that Dr. Ross explained, I think, so well in the 7-OH panel earlier this afternoon. Ultimately, the key takeaway is that consumers go out and HART supports medical freedom. The idea that in America, adults should have the right to make their own choices about improving their daily health and wellness until or unless the substance has been shown to have more harm than benefit. And there is a movement that is sweeping across the country that is very skeptical of Big Pharma and is demanding freedom to make these choices, and we're happy to be part of that.
And so all of us look for what the appropriate standard is for the identification of the correct safety profile for any product. It's what the FDA requires, but it also is common sense for consumers. If you are manufacturing a Kratom product or a 7-OH product, you have to have that information available both to the consumer, you have to have it available in your marketing materials, you have to have it available for regulatory agencies. And the critical issue here is whether or not the standard has been met. Now, if we're willing to draw a line, then we can go out on the floor and we can shut down those that do 7-H manufacturers and grain manufacturers that do not have the requisite scientific safety data for the labeling of 100 milligrams or 50 milligrams or 40 milligrams. Then if we can agree, let's go to champ shows and get rid of these people. I'm all in on it because we're about consumers and we're about making sure that when we get to the bottom line, that these products are safe. And those vendors out there aren't going to like this. They're going to say to you, what I hear, you're trying to shut us down. You should be. And we think everybody in this industry ought to be cognizant of the safety for consumers. If we're not, we're lost souls. We need to defend the consumer.
Yeah, is it your turn? Is it your turn? I lost track. Okay.
Whose turn is it?
Oh, actually,
Yeah, it's his turn. There he goes.
Okay, can you explain divergent approaches taken to regulation of FMO in various state capitals this year?
Yes, I can talk about that. First, and briefly, I get the kind of like, well, you take your products off the market, you take your products off the market, and we can do that all day. We're going to come here and talk about the happy hippo creative market bids, but we should get together and talk about those components, and we should do it with scientists informing the conversation. We should get together and talk about the marketing stuff with experts on what appeals to children in the conversation in the room. So I wanted to start there. About the virtual approaches taken to regulation of 7-OH from state capitals. There's been all sorts of outcomes around the country in state capitals. You got states like New York, that I think did a really good job this year. They passed 2 pieces of legislation, age restrictions limiting 7-OH in creative consumption of people over 21, and a law to ensure transparent labeling. They're really laying the groundwork for the kind of comprehensive science-based regulation that we push for. That they are showing that it's possible to both protect consumer access to things that are helping them in their daily life, while also protecting public health. So we love what New York did. In other states, such as South Carolina, there were compromises that not everybody on our side loved, that require a differentiation on the shelf between creative and 7-OH products. And we were comfortable with that, but not everybody on our side loved it. Sometimes, that's what compromise is all about. And then there were states such as Louisiana and Connecticut, where the other side's fear-mongering about 7-OH backfired and killed the whole creative industry by causing a universal ban on all creative and 7-OH products. And creative in general, it's not just 7-OH, creative in general is facing an existential threat in a lot of state legislatures. And a lot of customers lost access to it in these 2 states this year. Mostly because of a botch strategy, we think led more by GKC than AKA, to reclaim market share from 7-OH by doing these crazy attacks, by doing things like paying fake protesters to attack 7-OH instead of promoting the positive things about their own products. Nobody should be willing to risk the entire industry sector over condemning somebody else's work. And in our mind, the evidence is pretty clear. When the industry focuses on dividing people, then we're all going to lose. So, I know I'm a broken record on this, but we have several areas of common ground that we want to get together, and maybe we can agree on the legislation for next year.
So I think that the bottom line here is that if our attempt to protect consumers is rooted in advising the manufacturers on how they should manufacture and label and market their products, I think that's fair game. And we've worked actively in that space to remove vendors from our website that violate standards that we have set both on the GMP standard and on, you can cynically say that to me it's true, okay? And I can prove it. The bottom line here is that we ought to be defending consumers along the way, and we're working to do that. Happy Hippo is a great example. Happy Hippo developed their brand around a cartoon version of a hippo. They did it before there was any scrutiny on Kratom. When the state of Utah appropriately looked at the way that their material was potentially appealing to children, Happy Hippo agreed to abandon a high investment in their brand, and they're changing that packaging to make sure it's not appealing to children. That's a success story, but I don't see that happening yet on the other side. And I think that's important for us to be able to say with clarity that we are going to defend the market against those kinds of products.
Now, 708 companies claim that the AKA promoted the protest here in Las Vegas, and it was also behind the recently issued FDA warning letters on 708 products. Is that true?
No. I can tell you that as an advocate for free speech, that as much as I hated seeing protesters show up at an AK meeting in Providence, Rhode Island, where they not only just expressed their viewpoint, they were hostile, they were nasty, they actually surrounded Jack Canfield, who was going to report on the science of radio, and they harassed him as he entered the building. I didn't like that. When the police asked me, do you want them arrested? I said no. Not that I like it. I didn't particularly, because I mingled with the protesters outside here just to see whether they're legitimate protesters or not. I found some of them knew exactly what they were there for, some did not. This is part of what the process is. So we're not into buying protesters to actually come and demonstrate in any particular area. We do think that legitimate consumers should have their voices heard in appropriate platforms that are available to them, either through comments that are made on government websites or on our website as we go forward. The restriction on companies has to be respected. You cannot, as a manufacturer vendor, post, as I mentioned earlier, any kind of consumer testimonial about creating the health benefits that can be experienced by that consumer. We religiously try to keep our vendors out of harm's way on that because that's the painful target for the FDA to come and sit on you in the most unpleasant way. We think that that is an important consumer protection too. And here's the heart. I'm sorry, Bart. Here's the heart of the issue, in my opinion. That is that when you have a company that deliberately markets a Kratom product, says it's an enhanced Kratom alcohol, that's deceptive market. Because it is not even close to being a naturally occurring Kratom metabolite. 708 is not naturally occurring unless you will abide by that 2% limit and what will come now is the 1 milligram limit per serving. If you do that, we're in unison. Because then you're protecting consumers from products that naturally occur in the oxidation process created by the sun. But if you're going to chemically isolate and then enhance your product, then you're in bad territory, in our opinion. And that's where perhaps there is a discussion that can be made, but it's got to be grounded in the science that shows that that particular product at that serving size has that reasonable basis for safety to be available to consumers in the marketplace. If you fail to do that, just because you're chasing the almighty dollar, because you're selling 500 million servings to people, and I've gone into these shops and I've asked them, what's the difference between Kratom and 708? And you get these clerks, and I'm not going to be everyone responsible for what a clerk says, but the clerks in unison will say, 708 will knock you on your ass. I have violated my ban. I was quoting something. But I can tell you that never have I heard a clerk say that about pure Kratom.
If you want to discuss a milligram cap, we are here for that conversation. Okay? But the milligram, but the 2% thing is just totally arbitrary, and it's not science-based. And we want to have these conversations again based in science. The 2% cap, basically, you can get something with 20 milligrams of 7.0 and 1,001 milligrams of PIP, and that's legal, right? And obviously, it would be ridiculous for any consumer and probably very dangerous for any consumer to take a product like that. And so I think instead of arbitrarily picking a percentage that will just force that current 708 products off the market, we should look to science to figure out what an appropriate dosage limit would be. that's due to the fact that legacy manufacturers on the Kratom side have lost market share. Because if their concerns were truly rooted in safety, they would be unfounded, just based on both the FDA's own database and what we're not seeing all over the country that I talked about before. We're not seeing the hysteria in urban areas. We're not seeing it in rural areas, places that, whether it's the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia that's, suffering from the xylazine epidemic, or the hills of Appalachia where Oxy, first went big. We're not seeing it. We're not seeing that signal either place. And so, I don't know exactly why. I did find it disingenuous, some of those advocacy pushes in different states. In Colorado, the other side named the legislation that would have banned 7-OH after a young man who passed away tragically, but did not pass away of 7-OH. I saw the autopsy. He passed away in 2021 before 7-OH was even possible for him to take. It wasn't available. So those kinds of pushes lead me to not think that the other side is and their advocacy efforts are grounded in a real push for safety. Who are you going to trust? Are you going to trust that a side that invokes the name and the legacy of a person who was tragically deceased from a time when he couldn't possibly have taken 7-OH and uses that emotional appeal to try to get legislators to ban 7-OH? Or are you going to trust 1 million humans, not rodents or beetles, humans who have taken 500,000 servings of 7-OH the last couple of years and reported so few adverse events? I don't know about you, I'm going to trust those 1 million consumers. I don't think they need an anti-state government telling them exactly what they can and cannot take to feel better every day, especially when the preliminary science and the data do not suggest significant harm. Again, right now, both sides are bleeding money on public affairs and lobbying and policy experts, and I don't really think that that is what funders and members of either organization want to be spending money on. I think by uniting and lobbying jointly rather than in opposition, not only can we save money, but we can really help educate policymakers and reduce, we both agree, they don't know what Kratom is, they don't know what 7-OH is 90% of the time. We really need to spend time jointly educating them and working together rather than tearing at each other's throats.
So there is no record that would demonstrate that the AK has ever advocated for the naming of a piece of legislation other than as the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And if you look at Colorado closely, the opposition that the AK had to that bill was because of an attempt by the Global Kratom Coalition to unfairly and unscientifically oppose legitimate Kratom extract products, because the GKC mantra then was, we're going to attack extracts, making us the boogeyman. So we fought that battle, and even though the name survived, the provision that outlawed extracts did not. And we will continue to work in Colorado. It had nothing to do with 7-OH, frankly, because that provision is consistent with every other Kratom Consumer Protection Act that we've advocated for across the country. I think that where we can find common ground is where we can civilly have a discussion and promote to legislators what the appropriate consumer protections are, and that is what we'll get to eventually.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ross, for the great questions. Thank you, you guys started with the first question. I was saying, you guys have more questions?
Yeah, I thought we were going to, but we could do one more.
Okay, yeah.
We are actually out of order because you jumped the gun. I actually was following the format.
My bad.
Okay.
Let's do one more round, and then we'll do the closing statement.
Okay, sorry about that.
I just want to make sure the viewers at home understand. I was not on board. All right. Now, they claim scientific studies exist regarding the safe doses of 7-OH So why is AKA advocating for a 7-OH limit of 2% of the overall alkaloids in a product and a no greater than 1 milligram per serving of 7-OH?
So it's about safety. And we think that if you convert the naturally occurring levels of 7-hydroxymethylguanine that occur in the drying of the plants, then that's the level that should be done. And we agree that the 2% level is initiated on the overall fraction of the alkaloids and metabolites in the plant, the compound, was not a very accurate, precise number. That's why, and at the time it was our best guess at it, informed by some of the scientists who were working on this, it certainly tried to mirror what we were looking at in terms of the raw materials that were being imported into the United States. We have since been informed by new science that the better approach to this would be to not only limit it to the 2%, but also say that a serving size cannot exceed 1 milligram, because that's what the 2% converts to in the naturally occurring drying process of 7-hydroxymethylguanine in a naturally material. That's the basis for it. Now, if you isolate, synthesize, semi-synthesize, or fully synthesize out of thin air a 7-hydroxymethylguanine or superoxide product or an M product, then I think you have to have stricter standards. And that's why, until and if the 7-OH industry can produce the science that demonstrates that the consumer can safely consume at a serving size level documented by science that's above 1 milligram, then let's have that discussion. But not guess at it. Don't say, well, look at the 500,000 people or the 500 million people that doses that have been administered, and we don't have any adverse event reports. Well, first off, I've already talked to you about what the adverse event reporting system in the United States under the FDA is. It's nothing more than a reporting system. It is not the most credible adverse event reporting system in the country or the world. It's not. It is designed really to define clusters, and those clusters haven't been identified yet. But more importantly, and this is the critical fact, if we understand what the scientists are telling us, which is that the washout effect of 7-OH in the bloodstream of any individual who is deceased is not going to be detected. Think about that. If a person consumes 7-OH and has an adverse event that leads to a death, and let's just assume that hypothetically, if it happens, and it cannot be detected by a medical examiner or a coroner because the testing methodology doesn't exist to do it, or because the 7-OH is so unstable it washes out, then how can anyone credibly stand in front of any audience and say, there's no deaths related to 7-OH? The NMS lab warning was accurate and something worth us investigating in order to determine whether or not and whether additional testing methods need to be adopted in order to identify potential adverse events. I am not suggesting that any of us in this room want anyone to die from the consumption of your products, but do not hide behind the plain statistical data that says there's no proven 7-OH death yet. That's not the right standard. And look at the addiction liability, which is in front of us and there and available for discussion.
That is something that we are going to continue to study. And I think, the study that I was looking at recently that looked at levels of how high-performing each product was, and it actually showed that neither product reached, it was a 2024 study, I can get the study to give you 1 second here, but it was a 2024 study, and I think it was maybe in the Journal of Medicinal Chemistry. Anyway, it showed that neither 7-OH or mitragynine reached the level of encourage severe dependence in the way that that many other opioids like fentanyl and heroin do. And so it was a very encouraging study. I think for both products. And I think that's why we need more research to produce more studies like that. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Again, it's
let's have it get set. We got to set up 3 minutes. There we go.
a large place in the market for traditional kratom products. And frankly, I don't understand why this has developed into this winner-take-all battle. Because I think there is a more than large enough market throughout this country, if we get on the same page, for merchants and manufacturers to make great livings off both of them, and most importantly, for consumers to benefit from both of them. Everybody's got different neurochemistry, everybody has different types of pain, and everybody could benefit, I think, well, everyone benefits from different types of things. And so I think the last thing we should be doing is prematurely cutting off the science by going after certain products simply because they happen to be gaining publishing. So if you're interested in a more unifying approach, if you're interested in some of the principles of leading with responsibility that I laid out when I talked about HART, please come up to one of us after this and let us know who you are and what you do and how you might use your voice. All of us need to go and advocate with policymakers, be in state capitals, send emails, make phone calls, and let them know that we do not want our medical freedom constrained in the name of an intra-industry turf war. Okay? It shouldn't be about this person profiting or this company profiting. It should be about what are consumers asking for and who is doing the best job of making a product that can safely appeal to those daily health and wellness needs. If this were as dangerous as the other side is saying, why would a million people gravitate towards it? There are not that many people in this country that have a death wish. There's a lot of people in this country that just want to feel a little bit better today than they did yesterday. They just want to sleep a little bit better tonight than they did last night. That's why we're here. So if you're interested, come and visit with us afterwards and we can talk about how you can get your voice as part of HART's voice. Thank you to AKA for sponsoring this. We did it jointly, but thank you for conceptualizing this conversation. Thank you to you for coming all the way from Rhode Island and being our lovely accent. And thank you, Matt. And thank you, Matt, for inviting me to do this. I'm new to this space, and you're a decade into you're a veteran, and I really appreciate the hospitality.
So, Jeff, thank you as well, and thank you for participating in this. And if it were just up to Jeff and I think that we could find enough common ground that we could pursue a marketplace that recognizes the potential value of all of these products. However, what we're left with is the reality. The reality, as Jeff just mentioned, why would we prematurely cut off the science before we know whether or not 708 and what its safety profile is? Well, because that's the federal law. Because the federal law says that prior to market entry, you have to demonstrate the safety. You don't get a hall pass that you can go out and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and peddle what I want, and we'll wait for the science to catch up with me, because that's the prescription for consumers to be harmed. And we're a consumer-based organization, and we believe that's the primary mission that we have, and we will continue to fight for that. I have to say I'm a bit mystified by this concept that we should look at the marketplace as being large enough that we can split up the pie, or slice up the pie. Well, that's not the way markets should work. If everybody is on the same playing field, and we have the same standards for market entry, and we meet and comply with all of the federal laws associated with it, then that's great. Let's slice up the pie based on the performance of the products and the marketing that's done by them. That's the way the free markets work. But we don't let bad products onto the market, or potentially unsafe products on the market, to steal away from consumers. And I don't care. I frankly don't care and do not like the idea this is a turf war. This is a consumer war. And we should not expose a consumer to a product that is potentially unsafe. And we're going to wait for the science to catch up for it. Oh, and we say, whoops, we made a mistake. Let's get that product when the science proves and demonstrates that it's unsafe. I think that's important. The concept of there being a turf war in the kratom space in the United States and globally is a big problem. When I first was asked by the American Kratom Association leaders to join this fight, It was on August 29th of 2016. I've told them that you have no chance. Because once the Federal Register notice is published, there has never been in the prior 82 scheduling recommendations done by the DA a rescission. You are hooked. And I told them the only chance you have to stay on the market is after 2 years, which would have been the period in which it would have been banned. Then come back 2 years later and demonstrate that it's safe. That was ridiculous, but we won. And they say, how do you anyway? It wasn't better than me. We won because consumers spoke up. I can tell you with precision that if 7OH had been the product that we were looking at in 2016, it would have been made. And the reason I say that is that we had the science at the time to demonstrate the safety of pure vapor. And that's what won the day. We would all be banned, and we will all be banned if we pursue without good science 7OH. I encourage all of us to move by that concept. Thank you. We're going to invite Dr. McCurdy to come up, and he's going to have a Q&A. Anyone that has, if anybody that knows Chris McCurdy knows that he's blunt, forceful, and he's going to tell you the truth about what the status is. So,
just sitting still.
Chris, do you want to come up? And we need to
Going
I
crazy.
guess you can just let us
I'm gonna chew all my fingernails off because that's how crazy I'm going. I just gotta stand up. I gotta walk around.
Just do that one right there. You should do a lot.
That's better already.
Yeah, one other thing about me is I can't stand still. So. But happy to answer any questions. I will say thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm here on my own will. I am not here as a representative of the AKA Foundation or the University of Florida. I'm not speaking for them. I'm speaking for any questions you might have on this that week or anyone else is projected. That's up to you. Is there a microphone for questions? I can run around too.
So in your professional opinion, what would you say is the maximum dose that you'd like to see on the market? Because we're almost getting to this.
So, in my opinion, the maximum dose of purified 708 is 0. And I will state this from a scientific perspective. I don't know anybody that would go and advocate to put morphine on the market over the counter. It's an opioid. I don't know of anybody else that would advocate to put any other opioid into the marketplace today. And the concerns that we have are that this molecule, purified and isolated out, is an opioid. It's not going to get FDA approval to be an over-the-counter medication, regardless of what the story is. Because there's not an opioid that exists that gets into the brain that doesn't have patient liability associated with it. And so, if you really want to protect consumers, you don't put a product into the marketplace that we know is causing pollution from the start. And that's my professional opinion on it. We have the animal studies to show that. Would love to see the human studies to show that as well. We'd be happy to conduct any studies. Anybody in any space that wants to fund, I can put you in touch with the University of Florida Foundation. We work through all of that. I've not had one person come up to me to study or sponsor studies on 7-hydroxy. We did those studies in the early days on our own dime because we were curious about this product. And then as we were funded by the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, we learned a tremendous amount more, albeit again in animals. It hasn't been approved to go into humans, not even for investigational studies. And so I don't have a problem if 7-hydroxy turns out to be safe, more efficacious, and better as a compound once it's gone through the proper clinical trial studies, like any opioid that would enter the market from anywhere else, has gone through this proper channel. It may be better, and maybe it may truly save harm. I would like to make one thing very clear about the fall of 2023. In March of 2023, the FDA has approved naltrexone to go over the counter. In September of 2023, Narcan and naltrexone products became available in the over-the-counter marketplace. If you talk to anyone in the healthcare, epidemiological fields, or medical fields, they will tell you that it's Narcan that has caused the reduction, but they won't say that definitively either, because we don't have the data to back up that statement. So it's a great coincidence that both these things happen at the same time. They both may be contributing to the decrease in overdose deaths. But like I said, this was an event that happened at the same time, so you can't discount one over the other.
I have a question. There's more of a question with the AKA and their stance. I was just wondering, like, at what point in time they decided to take the stance on 7-OH being a dangerous substance? Because I've been the Kratom user since 2010. I took OPMS for years, and around 2018, 2019, I was taking OPMS Black, which had 7-ish milligrams of 7-OH in it. Didn't seem like the AKA had any problem with 7-OH being in one of their largest donors' products at that level, or did they need to prove the safety before going to market with that product? What changed? Is it?
Yeah, I can answer, and then you can add to whatever you think. Two things. One, we saw the introduction of 7-OH products. We went to HART and said, if you will not call them Kratom, which we think is important because it misleads consumers, and you have the safety data, they said they did, we signed an agreement. Turns out that wasn't accurate, and so we withdrew from the agreement. We saw on 7-OH product, or on OPMS products, labeling that indicated they had a higher level than was allowed of 7-OH, and so we tested those products. We then informed OPMS about the discrepancy because the testing came back and showed they had a very low level, almost undetectable with 7-OH. It was a printing error. Somebody watched the error and they corrected it. So, to my knowledge, there's never been, ever, in an OPMS product, any level 7-OH above the 2% level, and they, in fact, do not market a 7-OH product. And otherwise, they'd be off our website, I can assure you.
So I'm going to make a clear distinction as well. And it's not so much about, if you're going to ask a question about what is the right strength for 7-hydroxy, and what is the right constitution in a I can't say Kratom, Kratom product. It really has to be, these are two different discussions, completely different discussions. Because there is a network of alkaloids and other chemicals that are in a whole leaf Kratom, okay? 7-hydroxy, when we've done analysis of products in the marketplace, no longer has any tracing back to the plant material. So yes, we see mitragynine present, we see 7-hydroxy present, but we also see all these other unknowns that we hadn't ever identified before in a Kratom product. Those unknowns, these are things that if the FDA was looking at characterizing a drug product, they would make us fully characterize those unknown compounds as well. So we don't even know if they interact with other receptors, if they're benign, if they're toxic, if they have problems on their own, because none of this has ever been studied even in animals, in the products that are being marketed. So when you think about that, now some of these products, I think, are being studied in animals. We have not studied commercial products in animals. We've studied highly purified 7-hydroxy in our methods, which I can tell you is not orange, it's white. I don't know what the orange color is. Maybe there's other fillers in that product that were shown, or impurities. But what we've studied, highly purified 7-hydroxymitragynine, it clearly resembles prescription opioids. in our tests. And that's where the concern is. It's not to say that it may not end up, like I said earlier, being safer, but at the moment, I often say if it quacks like a duck, and it walks like a duck, and it looks like a duck, it's a duck. And so it's a pure chemical entity that we're trying to talk about, comparing to this nature's, what I always refer to as a symphony orchestra of compounds that are playing different tunes and either amping up systems or ramping down systems in response to that whole plant response that does include having the 7-hydroxy metabolite in it. And to take it a step further, no one's even talked about the complexity of the natural product in full kratom leaf, where it's metabolized, every single alkaloid that's in there is metabolized into other alkaloids that generally have activity as well. And so it's this cascading environment of things that happen within the full plant material versus isolated materials. And I spoke earlier today a little bit about isolated mitragonium and looking at that as a pure compound. And again, mitragonium is not yellow or orange, it's white when it's pure. And when it's studied, and there's a study that came out from Europe looking at mitragonium isolate, where they tested it in humans, and it did have some psychoactivity concerns at 40 milligram doses as an isolated compound by itself, right? So again, not in that whole context of all the other molecules, which may be somewhat self-protective or self-serving of each other. And so we don't know the answer to all those questions, but I can certainly tell you that isolated alkaloids in our hands, our mission from the original NIDA grant that we were funded was to isolate, purify, test as many of the different alkaloids as we can individually to see what their potential contributions were in the whole plant. I can also tell you that some of those alkaloids, when they're highly purified, kill animals when we inject them. Because they're not within that full context.
You purified those yourself to get to the 99.9% pure samples?
The samples that you were working with the metragine and the 7-hydroxymetragine, were 99.9% pure white powder. Were those purified yourself, or was that a fully synthetic?
Yeah, so it's not feasible to isolate 7-hydroxy from leaf material, and I can tell you that we've probably had the most leaf material in my lab. The day that the announcement was made from the DEA in 2016 that they were going to criminalize kratom, I had 25 kilos of kratom leaf in my lab. I called the DEA that day and asked them what I was going to do, and they said it's not under our jurisdiction. So I was afraid I was going to wake up the next morning being in possession with intent to distribute. And to this day, that still can happen. I have the proper licensures in place to have all this stuff in my lab, if it does. But I will also go further into saying, when we produce 7-hydroxy, the only way that we can produce it in an amount to study in an animal, let alone a human, is to make it semi-synthetically. So we very highly purify mitragonium, and then we oxidatively convert that through chemistry, just like is what it's done. I assume in the industry, I don't know the exact procedures. I can tell you the procedures we use. There's 3 different methods that we've used pretty reliably. One is explosive, and almost took out one of my research scientists. We had a very serious lab accident. And we look for alternative ways to change that chemistry, and now we can do it without an explosive environment to do it, but it has to be semi-synthetically made. We've also made MGM-15, which is becoming of interest more recently, and that's a fully synthetic product that we take from 7-hydroxy, large quantities of 7-hydroxy because the yields are terrible. And then we reduced that product down to this dihydro-7-hydroxy mitragynate. And so that we've not had enough of that material yet to study in animals. It has not been studied in animals ever, as far as I understand in the literature. It's been solved. Okay, well, you know someone that's done this study, but we don't have a study in the literature, and I haven't seen any.
An MGM study?
9 milligrams.
Yeah, the industry has been selling it, we're against it.
Well, that's good to hear,
There's only one.
because we got a whole batch of it
Yeah.
last week. And we're initiating testing on those products too. So my interest, I guess, you know, why I got interested in all this in the first place is I'm a pharmacist by original training, and so public health has always been of interest to me. And when products are out in the marketplace and showing something that could be promising or could be harmful, in this case, Kratom was the one that really did that. Initially for us, we started working with them in 2004, 2005, long before DEA was even aware that it existed. And we wanted to learn if there was going to be a benefit or a risk for it based on what we were hearing out of Southeast Asia. So I still think there's something unique to the full plant. And people on whatever side will not want to hear me say that. I don't think extract should be in the market either. I think it should be the leaf product as it was intended in nature and how it was originally used. Everyone can argue with me on that.
We've got a question back here.
I have a question and a statement at the same time. I think there's a big component missed out of all of this that people are not paying attention to, and it's the business side of this. You're talking about the science, which is great, and I think there's a divided line down the middle. There is. Bifurcated market. One side wants to go down this extract road, there's another one that's natural. Everybody's ripping up the hill with this extra strength. Let's go bigger, bigger, stronger, right? But explain something to the group in regards when it comes to regulations. We are in a deregulated mode right now, where the government is allowing us to participate in a business, and many are speaking scientifically and yet done no three-phase analysis at all. Is there the chance that with 7, because I've been in this game for 10 plus years now and do nothing but natural. I've never stretched from it. You are now creating potentially a drug. It can be argued that it's a drug. But is there the chance, if the FDA starts looking at this, I don't think they're going to ban 7-hydroxy because that would kill the plant, the alkaloid itself. But is there the chance that they could regulate this, make it a dietary ingredient, which then would open up all the markets, which then every dietary supplement company in the country is chomping at the bits to get access to this, as well as cannabis. And as small business owners, I'm going to pretty much bet that the vast majority of this room is not going to be able to compete.
Yeah, so I can't, I'm not a regulatory scientist by any means, and I can't speak authoritatively on regulation. So let me just put that caveat out there in the first bit. I can tell you that in discussions, so let me back up a step. We were brought in as consultants for my laboratory, and my people were brought in as consultants for the FDA's single ascending dose trial with Kratom leaf. That was still hasn't been published. It's being held up at the high levels of the FDA right now, but it's supposed to be
They're hiding
getting
it.
pushed out very soon. So in that discussion, we were, like I said, we were brought in to consult with them. They are also interested in looking at extract studies now. Okay. First and foremost, they wanted to switch directly from doing the single ascending dose trial to the human abuse potential with utilization of an extract. And I said, you can't do that unless you go back and do the single ascending dose trial with the extract, so you know the basis for safety to start for abuse potential. So until further discussions, I think they're very concerned in a regulatory space, and this isn't just the FDA, I think this is in the regulatory space in general, and probably Jeff and Matt can speak more to this, but there's a large concern about creating any kind of ruling that would allow for loopholes like the Farm Bill has in cannabis.
That's kind of my point I'm going down, is that we're watching this take place. I mean, look at the show we're at. You saw it all in vape, right? You saw it all in vape. Vape will be cleared out. Juul is coming back to the market. They stomped Juul into the ground. Big Tobacco's got it now. You're watching it. They're allowing everybody to play in the cannabis space and the hemp space. You synthesized hemp and turned it into Delta 8 and sold it in the stores. I came from regulatory background in tech. The government will allow you to play if you police yourself. If you do not police yourself, they will regulate you. And when they regulate you, that's when the big boys come in, and the vast majority of you are not going to be able to compete. And your businesses will be gone, and the vast majority, there will probably be 3 to 5 people in this whole entire industry that will be acquired, just like vape, and the rest will be looking for jobs. We can talk about the science, we can talk about the health and wellness. Your businesses are on the line, and there's more pressure now than there's ever been in the 10 years I've been into this business. There's 147 products here. It's gone like this, and there's a reason why it's gone like this. And now the attention's on, and now you forced a hand that I think the regulators are going to go, because if you ever talk to any politician, they don't know what it is. They really don't care. All they care is, I don't want any headaches in my neighborhood, and I want people voting for me. Well, if they start getting headaches because methadone clinics are filling up, people are waiting out at 9 o'clock in the morning, waiting in line to go by 7, and stores are getting broken into, and dispensers are getting broken into, and the only thing they're stealing is 7, yeah, you got problems on your hands.
It's already happening.
It's already happening.
Yeah.
And what it is you guys are fighting about the wrong thing. Your businesses are on the line. We talk about big government, big pharma, big this, but you're acting like you're as big as them. You're acting like you're a pharmaceutical company, and you're not. You've done no trials. You have no science. Using humans as guinea pigs is not human trial. That's not the way it's done. It takes hundreds, if not thousands of people, tens of millions of dollars. Before I got this business, I consulted with 2 of my friends who are VPs of clinical trials about this product. I'm a businessman that makes investments. It's the first business I've ever been when it's actually helped somebody. But I tell you what, right now, it's going the wrong direction. And I think the regulatories are coming, and Mac and I have talked in the past. I'm a neutral party in this whole thing of how this thing operates. I think serving sizes have to come because 7 does metabolize. If you're doing extracts, yes, it has to metabolize. The dosing's a problem. You're walking around going 10 milligrams, 50 milligrams, even up to 80 to 120 milligrams in less than 6 months. Don't tell me there's some trial and that everybody knows what it's doing. It's mathematically impossible. And it's reckless. And I ask where everybody's moral compass is.
So let me answer your question. Let me go back to your question. Is it possible that the FDA would approve 7-OH as a dietary ingredient? The answer to that today is no. No way. Until there was data. And that's the bottom line. You properly identified the issue. Today, there's no data that would convince the FDA that there is a serving size that would be acceptable as a dietary ingredient right now. Does that mean it's impossible? No. Chris has said it right. That we may see something down the road. More likely as a drug because of its effects, psychoactive effects, but there's no way it would be approved today. Let's go with one last question because Chris has got to get to a plane. So.
Oh,
Sorry, this gentleman was waiting in line a long time.
Two questions.
two questions. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So, thank you again, Dr. McCurdy, for being here. I hope that you have an opportunity to read the MGM paper. Our lab is the one that put that one together, Colorado Chromatography. It'll hopefully be published. Its manuscript is being reviewed in JMedChem now. So I have a couple of questions, try to link them all together for you, and one for Matt potentially here as well. So, in your opinion, is there an acceptable maximum tolerable dose for kratom leaf, kratom extract, nitrogynin in general? And if there is an acceptable maximum tolerable dose, based on the fact that we know the human metabolism is going to metabolize that 7-OH into 7-hydroxynitrogynin, do you then, how can you have a maximum tolerable dose for one but not the other? First part of the question. Second question for you is you talked a little bit about a symphony of alkaloids in a full leaf product, and I'm curious because, you said yourself that we don't actually know what all the interactions are between that, so you're kind of, stating that there's unidentified mechanisms of action there. So how is it that full kratom leaf is still not just a, unprecedented human trial if we don't understand the full mechanism? As you know, if you want to file an IND, you need MOA data, you need to have identified that mechanism if you want to get to phase 1. And then you talk a lot about whole leaf, so does that mean you're against kratom extract and against highly potent kratom products, similar to what some of the AKA donors are putting together?
I think I said that already.
Perfect, thank you. And then my last kind of overall arching question is Matt just said that there is no world where NDIN would be, accepted per FDA, and I tend to agree with him. Now, I disagree with you though, Mac, in terms of, I think there is no world where you get a true NDIN accepted just based on the fact that we know there's opioid receptor activity. I don't think the FDA would ever accept that as an NDIN and it'd say, go file an IND, right? And so I guess is the ultimate point you're trying to make here is that everybody here should just pack up their bags, go do pharmaceuticals and file INDs and leave this market behind and reduce access to all these potential people who are using this product?
I truly 100% believe if you're going to try and sell a single chemical entity that has opioid receptor activity that we know gets into the brain, that it should be a drug and regulated by the FDA, yes.
Including kratom.
Kratom does not have exclusive opioid activity.
But it does have opioid activity, correct?
Correct.
So then...
So let's go back to your first question.
Yes.
Since you've asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, sorry, I threw them all out, all of you.
We had one question.
Yeah.
But I will start with what we know for any basis of safety in leaf material. And I can tell you that I get anecdotal emails from people all the time that are telling me they're taking this amount, that amount, or whatnot. The highest one I've gotten is 200 grams of leaf material, which to me almost seems impossible.
That'd make me barf.
But that's what I've been reported to me. This is after years of use. We don't know how tolerance develops. We do know tolerance develops. We just don't know what that time frame looks like. No one's done chronic studies in animals or humans either way. But what we have done, that was, again, what I mentioned earlier under consultation with the FDA, was the single ascending dose trial. That data was presented in the College on Problems of Drug Dependence in 2024, and I wish the paper was out by now, but it hasn't been released by FDA, as I mentioned earlier. That trial was showing no adverse events at all in the low doses, the 2 to 5 gram of leaf material that's always been touted as sort of the natural dose. If you go back to looking at the traditional newspapers, that's well within line with what is used in Southeast Asia traditionally in the tea products and servings. If we get into the 8, 10, and 12 gram doses that were given of leaf material, you start to see some adverse events, okay? They're not significant. They didn't stop the studies. They didn't cause for reversal. In fact, what they did was they set a safety basis up to 12 grams to proceed with a human abuse potential, where 12 grams will be the intermediate dose within that trial. And so that trial is being designed at Baylor University right now, along with FDA, and again, we're consulting on that in terms of making sure that the product is tested, is fully tested. I don't think there's a Kratom product in the marketplace, probably even a dietary supplement, that's gone through as much testing as what the FDA required for the single ascending dose trial. The other thing that's not being talked about at all with leaf material is once you get into those quantities, 10, 12, 16 higher grams in a single dose, all of these products are being tested for heavy metals at what would be the serving size dose that's on the bottle, okay? We have had a year to get a batch qualified to give us that 16-gram dose, according to what the FDA will allow for lead content. So some of these individuals that are consuming extremely high amounts of leaf material over long periods of time may also be getting not only effects from too much kratom alkaloid and kratom material, but may be getting heavy metal poisonings.
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know the answers to these questions, but I can tell you it's taken us a year to source a batch that made it to the level of lead so we could go to a 16-gram dose according to the FDA. So what's a safe amount? I can't honestly tell you, except for that 12-gram dose that we saw one person vomit in the FDA trial. Extracts, no data to say that any extract is safe, other than the anecdotal data of people taking it, just like we're using the anecdotal data of 7-OH products to say that it's safe. So until things are done through scientifically sound and controlled methodologies, in my opinion, as a pharmacist and a medical professional, you don't say that it's safe.
So then I guess, in conclusion, with your opinion as a medical professional, would you say that a number of the different brands that are funders of the AKA that sell these extract kratom products that have unidentified mechanisms of action for these various alkaloids are essentially trying to do the exact same thing that 7-OH is doing right now with unprecedented human trials, in your opinion? And they should go file an IND.
I mean, I've said it here, I'll say it again. I think the only product that should be in the marketplace is the natural leaf. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Did you have a question?
I do. I have a question. So it's a well-documented scientific fact that mitragynine is converted in significant quantities by the CYP3A4 receptor in the liver into 7-OH. So how are you differentiating between the two? Would you consider mitragynine a prodrug of 7-OH?
So the definition of a prodrug is it has to be biologically inactive. Mitragynine has got biological activity on its own. Yes, it is metabolized and converted into a much more powerful and active opioid compound. So if you want to talk about is it a prodrug for an opioid effect, it would be, because mitragynine by itself does not have good analgesic property. It has interesting properties, but it's biologically active. And it is interacting with opioid receptors, and we all know that it's a partial agonist, not only in cellular assays, but in animal studies. And we'll see what happens in human studies once it's there. I think the big difference that we seem to forget in the discussion around the science is that when mitragynine is converted in the body to 7-hydroxymitragynine, it's done so in the presence of the full kratom product. And there's that whole complex amount of other alkaloids that are present at that same moment that could be mitigating some of the other effects that we could see. There could be bad effects from other metabolites that we don't even have studied yet. There could be very beneficial effects from some of the other metabolites. And as I mentioned, some of these alkaloids that we've purified and taken out are very fast to produce harm individually in animals. And I'm talking about death immediately when they're taken outside of that whole context. And so I think it's scientifically inaccurate to just say that mitragynine is converted to 7-hydroxymitragynine in the body, so 7-hydroxymitragynine is safe. No one's taking pure mitragynine and converting it to 7-hydroxymitragynine. We've done that in laboratory animals, yes, but no one has done that in a human trial where it's outside of the realm of all the other alkaloids that are present in the plant and all the other chemicals that are present in the plant, which also haven't been studied.
Well, could you educate me on some of those alkaloids that you have discovered in kratom that could be potentially lethal?
Sure. All of them.
Oh, okay.
All of them. At the right dose, any single one of them is lethal. The ones that were more lethal, and again, we haven't published LD50s. We're not allowed to do LD50 studies at the University of Florida. It's against our ethical standards, and so we find these things out by accident because we purify the compound. We have to show to our IECO committee, which is our Animal Care and Use Committee, that because this is in a natural plant that has it in it, and we can go up to these doses, and we know that this dose of the whole plant material corresponds to this much alkaloid. So they give us that safety basis to say, okay, you can put it in an animal, right? We take that same amount, put it into an animal, and the animal dies within minutes. That's how we know. We don't know what that means in terms of what its actual lethal dose is, because once they're dead, IACOC tells us you can't do that. So the compounds that did it, just to answer your question, speciogynin, speciosialatin, pananthine, and to some extent at high doses, not the doses that we would normally see, but because we were really looking into what doses could we push in the rats with mitragynine and 7-hydroxy.
I mean, I think one of the other things you have to one of the things we have to discuss is we only talk about death. I said that. Why are we not talking about production? Production of society, not a bunch of zombies that are laying in bed and making products that make the country productive.
So I will say death is not the only thing that we saw. Most of the time it was seizures, which were not reversible by naloxone. So the animals would come back, either die from the seizure or they would resolve. But the seizures are non-responsive to reversal by naloxone, which indicates it's not an opioid toxicity for those alkaloids. So that's one point. The productivity point, again, can't really make a statement one way or the other at this point. I know that most of the survey data that's been collected shows that it elevates mood, enhances productivity, enhances focus, helps with pain, all these things, but from our perspective, we can't make a certain claim that there's any therapeutic benefit from any of these products, right? Because they haven't been validated and vetted through the FDA.
So thanks to Chris for doing this Q&A. We appreciate it. I'm sorry that Fellow One asked a pointed question about the funding for the AKA. I can tell you this, we do accept funding from companies. A substantial amount of money comes from consumers. And I can tell you that doesn't corrupt us, because here's the thing. I have turned down money that was offered to the AKA because they wanted to buy us. And we don't play that game.
Wow.
We take full control of our agenda. It's not influenced by these individual companies. And I can tell you the guy that was paying him can't say the same thing. It's all industry funded. So that's just the fact of the matter in our industry and in this community as we go forward. We're looking forward to more of these kinds of discussions going forward. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
That's one. Hold on, let me end my life. Bye, guys. So, you too.